Unfortunately, no, Emma. I think just to say that the current crackdown on Saudi women's rights activists is absolutely shocking. And if anything, it really sets us back quite a long way in terms of women's rights reforms. We should be celebrating the upcoming lifting of the driving ban on the 24th of June, something that Saudi women's rights activists, including Hala, who is joining us here, have been championing. And for those of us who have been on the sidelines, who have been supporting this campaign, it is absolutely disappointing and awful that we are now in a position not to be celebrating this moment, this historic moment, but in fact are now having to fight to get out the actual champions of the driving ban who are now behind bars, silenced, or in self-exile. Just to give you more of a sense of what's happening in Saudi Arabia, the way in which Saudi Arabia has always dealt with human rights activism is that they've seen it as defiance. Saudi Arabia has always banned protests, independent human rights organizations, and trade unions. Its social contract is that of demanding obedience from its citizens while the state acts as its guardian. In the many years I've worked in Saudi Arabia, I have always seen repeated arrests and detentions of its critics and of human rights activists and dissidents, and the stifling of both debate and discussion that is not managed by the state. Now, this crackdown is unprecedented and it is unique in two ways. Firstly, in the way that it's targeted women's rights defenders, prominent women's rights defenders, their sheer number and the way they've actually arrested them, which my colleague Heber will go into detail. Secondly, it is unique in that while Saudi Arabia has always arrested activists before, they've never at the same time gone around touting those reforms that the activists have demanded. So this is the first time we're seeing both the Saudi authorities saying that they're about to lift the driving ban and yet arresting the very people who have been championing this reform. And then one of the big issues, of course, is what are these reforms? So when we talk about Mohammed bin Salman and his Vision 2030 and how he has come in and is being touted as a reformer and has gone around the world to really show himself as not just a reformer, but a women's rights reformer. When we're looking at women's rights reforms in themselves, those have been incredibly minimal. So the major, most serious impediment to women's rights in the kingdom is the male guardianship system. So like the way in which the state sees itself as the guardian and citizens owe them their obedience, Saudi Arabia gives men the power over women in which they act as the male guardian, and their dependents of the women must owe them their obedience. Male guardianship system as it currently exists means that all women from birth until death are perpetual minors, in that they have crucial life decisions like traveling abroad, obtaining a passport, undertaking higher education, marrying, or even leaving prison, which is decided upon by a male guardian, which could be their father, their brother, their husband, or even their son. The male guardianship baton sort of passes from male relative to male relative as and when their relationship changes or depending on who is around. That system has not changed. We had a moment of hope last year in April 2017 when the Saudi king issued a decree saying that he would abolish arbitrary provisions of male guardianship system. The way the male guardianship system exists, it's not a specific law. It exists in a multitude of laws and policies and practices in which authorities can demand permission from women, of either a male guardian or male relative's permission. Now, some of which is not actually in any law or policy. This decree stated that any arbitrary requirements of male guardianship will be abolished, and they are not allowed to insist on male guardian permission in those situations. And it also called for all government agencies to submit their rules around male guardianship to the royal court within the matter of 3 months. Now, that moment meant that we felt that there was a possibility that those rules may be reviewed and could potentially even be abolished. That 3-month deadline passed and we've heard nothing since. And then in September, we heard that the driving ban was being lifted. Well, we have had little since then to talk about male guardianship system and how that may actually be tackled. Since then, we've seen Mohammed bin Salman opening cinemas in the country, allowing women to enter the workforce in areas that was closed off to them, like air traffic control, border control, traffic police. Now, these are very, very small areas of reforms that we're seeing, but the large largest impediments to women's rights reforms, whether it's the male guardianship system, other issues as well when it comes to women's rights, is still very much intact, and that's not going away anytime soon. The current crackdown of the most prominent women's rights defenders means that those women's rights reforms are going to be limited, slow, and may end up stopping altogether. The signal that Mohammed bin Salman is giving is that he is the only reformer in the country, and that you as a citizen cannot demand those reforms. You can only be grateful for those reforms, but you cannot simply demand it anymore. Now, most recently, and my colleague Heather will go into detail about this, we've seen 2 further women's rights activists being arrested simply for showing support for the women who had been arrested already. That suggests something more, not just that you are denied the space for activism, denied the space to speak to the outside world about what's happening in your country, but for women who want to even show support for those who have been arrested, they are even denied that expression.